You're listening to WCAT Radio, your home for authentic Catholic programming.
Humble Faith listeners, it's great to have you back. This is Sean Kelley, your host, and here on Humble Faith, where we discuss normal people's fears, concerns, questions, and doubts about their faith. And today we have two really amazing guests. I'm really excited to introduce Ronda Chervin. Rhonda, how do I pronounce your last name?
Chervin.
Chervin, just like it's spelled. Wonderful. Rhonda is the author of Taming the Lion Within, and I kid you not, 80 other faith-based books. She is a wealth of spiritual knowledge, and I'm honored to have Rhonda on our show today. And next to me, I also have David Dowd. And David is the recently published a book called Sad Songs. And Sad Songs is the view from the front lines on life and death. And this is a very deep topic that we're going to be exploring today. As you all know, what David said earlier, I would like to use David's explanation that Humble Faith is designed to be a bridge between non-believers and their doubts, fears, and worries, and the believers. And we want to discuss a very deep and powerful topic on life and death today, which is what David's new book is all about. So, David, the book Sad Songs is about abortion and the businesses that create those abortions. And I got to ask you, man, what inspired you to write that book?
Sean, thank you for your question. Your question's important. Each of us is prompted by our life experiences, and each of us in our brokenness, perhaps, find challenges that we have to find the character to stand up to. I have my own challenges, and part of my challenges had to do with my family upbringing and the brokenness in my family upbringing. But, the woundedness that my mom had was something that created a compassionate view in me that didn't find expression until I was in my mid or late 20s, when I became interested in, I was introduced to the pro-life movement by a priest who encouraged me to read Bernard Nathanson's book called Aborting America. I was stunned. I was absolutely stunned. And gradually, over a series of many years now, from the 1970s until the 1990s, I became more and more active in the pro-life movement, eventually taking part on the sidewalks. And I was a sidewalk advocate in Boston and in Diocese of Hartford and Norwich in Connecticut. And when I moved to Florida 3 or 4 years ago, I became very active. I'm a snowbird here in Florida, so I became very active on the front lines. And the difference between the spiritual cultures became evident to me. The culture of death, represented by the operation of the abortion facility, the operations managed and owned by individual human beings, the people who were the death courts who would guide the abortive mothers into the abortion clinic, they were all operating according to a certain understanding of life. And here we were in the sidewalks trying to defend life, trying to promote a culture of life. And I've done some writing, and I just realized we need to tell this story.
Wow.
And so we wrote Sad Songs, a view from the front lines of the spiritual battle between the culture of death and the culture of life, a Sidewalk Advocates journal. This is a series of 30 different essays that I eventually did publish on my Facebook page as they occurred. And then when we sat back, we realized we might have a story here that needs telling.
Well, this is a very important and controversial topic, and I'm really excited for our listeners to gain both you and Rhonda's perspective on this. Rhonda, when you were speaking about when you were speaking about David's new book, Sad Songs, earlier, I could see and hear the passion that you have. Where does your passion for this topic come from?
Well, you're not going to believe this, but I was conceived at a Communist Party orgy by atheistic parents. And my mother had had many abortions. And the only reason I got to exist is the following, that my father happened to love zoology. He was an amateur zoologist. And he said to my mother when she became pregnant, he said, little animals are very cute. Maybe babies are as cute as little animals. I'll help you take care of the baby. And this atheist and then they became fierce ex-communists. In any case, out of this background came my existence. So of course I'm very keen on people not aborting their babies, since I would have been aborted for sure, except for this providence of God. And it happened to be just the year that I found out Jesus told Sister Faustina in Poland that the nuns should pray for women having abortions. So I consider myself to be a cross between Sister Faustina and zoology. Wow. In any case, I was a total atheist. I certainly would have had an abortion if I got pregnant, but I didn't happen to get pregnant. But anyway, through various miracles, I became a Catholic when I was 21. And I couldn't believe how the people in the circle of daily Mass Catholics, who are all disciples of Dietrich von Hildebrand, and these disciples, I couldn't believe how they were more excited when a baby was born into this group than when a book was being published. Because to me, a baby was just this lump from which oozed different material substances from the mouth and the bottom. That's how I thought of a baby. Can you imagine that? So once I really understood the beauty of what a new human being is from the moment of conception, then when Roe v. Wade took place and all that, and we started to Operation Rescue and all these different things, I joined immediately, and it was very important to me to go once a week to the abortion clinic and pray in front of the abortion clinic. So that's a very unique way of coming into the movement, I would say.
Wow, that is amazing. Your backstory, how you went from one extreme to the other, Rhonda. Your perspective is going to be very valuable in this interview. All right. So the first question I'd like to ask each of you, because both of you have been, it's not just an opinion you have. You've taken action and you've spent a lot of time on the front lines. What did you call it earlier? Sidewalk counseling you do? And
the term can be sidewalk counseling or sidewalk advocacy.
Okay. If you could quickly define, David, what is, and I'll hit you with the first big question here in a minute, but what is sidewalk counseling, sidewalk advocacy? What exactly is that?
I would like to describe my dear friend, Sean Brogan, who's been doing this work for almost 40 years now in Boston. Sean, in my observation, gets up on a Saturday morning at 6:30. He goes to Mass. And then when the abortion clinic opens in Boston, he's on the sidewalk and he accompanies the woman, sometimes the woman with the man, from and on the sidewalk as they approach the door of the abortion clinic. Professor Robert George from Princeton University said about a sidewalk counselor named Don Golden, who was a sidewalk counselor in the Diocese of Springfield. He's doing so much more important work than I'm doing. I'm up here and you're asking me to be a guest speaker, but Don Golden is sacrificing his life to be the last effort to try to save a baby. Can you imagine the grace of God stirring in a soul of an individual who says, please God, use me so this mom might keep her child, knowing that child faces extinction.
How do you mean sacrificing his own life?
Very practically speaking, Sean, we get up in the morning, and I've done this. I'm at age 72. I'm not able to do this as much as I did. But people are up at 5 o'clock in the morning on Saturday here in this Erie region where I live, and they give up their Saturdays.
Wow.
And they it's very difficult to kind of put into words, because when you recognize so many people have so many different interests where they can place their time and energy, and these are people who devote their time and energy to saving the lives of other people. I've been on the sidewalks in Hartford, Connecticut with Rhonda and students from Holy Apostle College. And, the students are praying. Rhonda and her friends are seated there, the faculty. And then there are sidewalk advocates who go up and they walk alongside these moms. And Sean made a very important point. When he started this work, he could have a dialogue with the mom. But over the years, in this culture, the moms have become angry, they've become non-communicative, and they push us away. And yet an example that I can give you is Monsignor Philip Riley. We were invited to go to Brooklyn, New York, and a group of us from Boston. We stayed at the monastery where Monsignor Philip lived. He was the founder of Helpers of God's Precious Infants. We stood in a prayer pen with these wooden horses holding us together for 3 hours, saying 3 hours of prayers. Monsignor Philip Riley stood at the door and he said to the moms, "I'm sure this is the worst day of your life." And the morning that we were praying for this 3 hours on the sidewalk, 50 moms changed their minds.
Wow.
Monsignor Philip is a blessing. But
that's why this book is thrilling, by the way. The book has many instances, not of success, but of seeming failure. But then in contrast, the moments when someone does turn around, particularly because these spiritual warriors, these sidewalk advocates, will offer the mother exactly, they'll say, "We'll drive you to the place where they'll help you, take care of you." Some of these places take them for 2 years after the birth of the child until the mother is able to work or to get married. It's just incredible, this whole movement, and so unknown on the other side,
Grace.
Of course, one of the biggest things is the way two of the most huge abortionists changed their mind, partly because of sidewalk counselors. So Bernard Nathanson was the one who helped put through Roe v. Wade, and then eventually he turned around, and he had been a Jewish atheist, and he became eventually a staunch Catholic believer.
Wow.
And he wrote this book, Aborting America. He gave talks all around the world and he made films of what abortion really was so that people could see this. And then Abby Johnson, specifically, these sidewalk counselors would talk to her, make friends with her, sing happy birthday to her on her birthday. And she was running the clinic and had never actually seen an abortion. Mm. And eventually she turned around and she's a big pro-life activist. So we have these wonderful examples of this.
But I don't want to, I have to jump in because I want the reader to understand, the listener to understand. Our book focuses on a couple of abortion clinics in a certain part of Florida. And our story is a story where we can mention some of the examples that Rhonda or I might respond as we discuss this with you. But what the ordinary experience of a sidewalk counselor, as Rhonda so carefully noted, is very much a daily encounter with the brokenness and the carnage and the routine of getting out of a car, of walking past. We have the death courts in Fort Pierce who actually have their iPhones with music turned up. They hold umbrellas. they block the line of sight with the sidewalk advocate. And this dear friend of ours, who's a sidewalk counselor for many years, her name is Grace. When she learned that we were going to write this book, she asked, please tell the story from the point of view of the sidewalk advocate, so people can know that we refer people to Rachel's Vineyard. We refer people to the crisis pregnancy centers. We refer people to Catholic charities so they can gain the support that Rhonda was describing right here on the same street, on Delaware Street.
Guys, I would be remiss if we didn't share those resources with our listeners. So we're definitely going to share those resources with our listeners, because the more people that have awareness and access to those resources, the more people will seek them out. So we'll definitely do that before this show is over. But I want to circle back to something, and this comes earlier. I was coaching someone that works at one of the businesses I consult and coach for. And we got into a faith type of conversation, and I had recommended a book to him on marriage a couple months ago, and he shared with me that he just finished he just finished the book, and he's like, I loved it, and he goes, but I want to try to get my wife to listen to it too. And I'm like, why is that? He goes, because I think if she'll listen to it too, then it'll really help our marriage. But I'm struggling with that. And I go, what's getting in the way of you asking your wife to listen to the book and read it? And he says to me, well, it's got a lot of religious overtones. The book is a lot of faith stuff in it. I was like, well, what's your aversion to bringing faith in your marriage? And seriously, I'm trying to understand. And he tells me, growing up, I came from a very religious family, and a lot of the people in the church and in my family I just constantly saw them judging people, making others feel persecuted. And I feel like I think this is very relevant for this conversation. Because I think a lot of people turn away from faith because of the way they begin to feel judged. So I wanted to ask both of you, who have spent a ton of time and energy doing God's work, how do you educate people walking into these clinics and, without making them feel persecuted? And David, to your point, it's like sin. The fact that you go there to the street where they're checking in. I love how you broke that down, where they're getting out of their cars, because like sin is happening all around us all the time. But you're right. This is it's almost like a scheduled sin. Like it's scheduled and they're going to the location. It almost gives you an avenue to really fight evil directly. But how do you do that without it making people feel persecuted?
You're asking such an important question, Sean. And frankly,
David, do you mind if I start with Rhonda on this one? She's got something important, and then we'll come over to you afterward.
Please.
Thank you. But I want both of you to.
Okay. A very important incident that I experienced praying in front of the abortion clinic is the person who helped most of the women to even look into alternatives was a woman with a stroller and a baby in it. And she said, I had an abortion years ago, and this is how terrible it made me feel. And so I want to talk to you about why it's better to have a baby like this baby right here in my stroller than aborting the baby. See, so she had this personal witness that was certainly not judgmental, see, because she could witness personally to all of this. So I think that's an important feature of not all the sidewalk counselors are people who were always good and never sinned in any way. But another thing that was very, very important was I used to pray in front of an abortion clinic in Watts, California, which is the block area near Los Angeles. And we prayed in front of this clinic. And the leader of our group, what he would do was he made friends with the owner of the clinic, who would come out to get a donut and coffee. So he would bring her to a coffee shop and talk to her. And he made friends with her. And this is what she would do. Because he made friends with her, what she did is she told the women coming in, before you have an abortion, talk to those people outside they can give you alternatives to abortion and only have an abortion after you've talked to them. So isn't that miraculous, right?
This is beautiful. Change in our faith takes place from relationships. And Rhonda just provided you a beautiful example of the way people can respond in relationships. But to Sean's point, between the time that the car drives into the parking lot, where in our experience at some abortion clinics, you can actually approach the car, to the time that the woman and possibly the man walk out of the car, across the parking lot, into the abortion clinic, we may have between 30 and 40 seconds. 30 and 40 seconds when a woman is absolutely prepared herself and has been prepared by the abortion clinic to barricade her mind from anything we say. So this is a really good question, because I'll tell you, this is where my biggest learning experience here in Florida has occurred. I mentioned our coordinator, Jim Toma. Jim is he was a music teacher in the Fort Pierce School of the Arts, and he taught people to play the trumpet. And he has a marvelous, gentle way of talking to people. Whereas in my head, I can be very assertive, and I can sound angry even though I'm trying to be assertive. And Jim helped me understand the tone of my voice is such an important observation to be self-aware of, to recognize that we're offering an alternative, we're offering the opportunity, and going back to the beautiful experience of Monsignor Philip Riley. And I can tell you countless of my friends on the sidewalk, Mary Dell and Grace Gallico and Catherine Booth, each of them recognized the love this woman doesn't have from her baby. Catherine Booth shared an incredible story with us yesterday. She told us a story about a woman who had been raped, and she wanted to have an abortion. And somebody interceded. And in relationship, now she had the moment, she had the time, and this kind of may have taken place in a crisis pregnancy center. But the fact was that the mother came to understand if she killed her baby, in addition to being raped, she would compound the suffering that she would endure in the post-abortive stage of her life, which every mother who goes into a clinic this is now going to be, she's always a mother, but she's going to be a mother of a dead baby. And that maternal bond goes so much deeper than we can begin to acknowledge in our busy lives.
Right. Women were made to love, and it's like you can't just remove that part of you. I think that's right. So. Well, Rhonda, what were you going to say to that?
Oh yes, I was teaching ethics, and I wanted to concentrate on abortion. So I used as an example throughout the book about choices people make, ethical choices. I used the example of two college students, and the woman gets pregnant, and then all the excuses that they use to justify having an abortion, right? So I have it all like a little novel in the book. And the book is called Living in Love, about Catholic ethics, about Christian ethics. Anyway, so there was a young woman in my class, and she kept cursing me while I was talking. And I just sort of ignored it. At the end, in her final paper, she wrote to me, she said, "You probably wondered why I was cursing you while you were speaking in class. It's because every argument you gave for abortion, in order to refute them, every argument you gave was something I used to justify aborting a baby. And I feel so guilty that I can't walk into a supermarket because I might see babies."
Wow.
Is that an amazing experience?
Wow. Well, okay. So I want to further speak to that side of it. You mentioned the rape scenario, and I think a lot of non-believers struggle with the all or nothing, black and white. It's right or wrong that are pro-life people. They struggle with that because they're like, well, there should be circumstances where if rape. But I get what you said, David. Spoke to me too, because you mentioned how I almost framed like in my head like two wrongs don't make a right.
Right.
Like, okay,
Right.
You could have a blessing from that horrible situation, or you can make two wrongs out of a one wrong.
John, I could give you the example of being at a summer gathering with Operation Rescue in Boston, and Bill Cotter invites the moms who kept their babies, and I was standing beside a couple of moms, and the children were playing in a little merry-go-round, and the one mom's baby was the result of a rape, and we watched her little boy reach out to a little girl who the mom had saved from abortion. And the moment of love between the two little children was something we all felt watching.
Wow. That would be a beautiful thing to witness.
Now, I have to just, reel us in for the moment, because many of the stories that Rhonda and I are sharing are stories from our personal experience. We can't fit them all into sad songs. So, this book is a book that really tries to, and did. I mean, I was on the sidewalks each day. I was observing what we saw each day, and I was, recording the story. We have a beautiful story in here of a woman was going into a chiropractor's office on the day that we were at the Planned Parenthood, which was the next office to the Planned Parenthood office. She started complaining to the Planned Parenthood death courts about the fact they were deceiving the woman going in. And so Jim and I stayed and listened, and we realized she was making some strong points. And so we invited her to, explain why she was speaking up, just being there by coincidence. And later I invited her for a coffee at a Starbucks, and she told us her story. And Mimi, her name is Sammy, tells the most incredible story of her own experience going in for a checkup at an abortion clinic in California, thinking she was just going to have a checkup, and then all of a sudden realizing she was being guided in and she had an abortion, and now she's in her 30s, very attractive woman, and never has been able to conceive a baby.
Wow. That's pretty amazing. These stories you guys have are amazing, and the time and energy you put into this cause is beautiful, and I have a lot of respect for both of you. All right, I want to, because Rhonda, we're kind of running low on time for you. I'd like you to explore, before we do your outro, I'd like to hit you with a specific question, because it really, I think it ties into one of your biggest areas of expertise, Rhonda. So Rhonda, you mentioned like the feelings that women who, and the excuses tied to those feelings that women who are planning on getting a divorce kind of go through. I've heard medical experts talk about how there's two sides of our brains, the side that understands language, logic, features, benefits, facts. And then there's the emotional side of our brain, which can't process any of that. But what they say is all human decisions are tied to the emotional side of our brain. So to that point, what are some of the emotions that these women are going through that lead to a decision that is totally against Christ and faith?
I would say basically they feel desperate. Now, the feeling is desperation. So years back, many girls who had abortions, they would feel as if my parents know that I got pregnant outside of marriage, my father would kill me. That would be the feeling. I can't tell anyone that I'm pregnant because my parents would totally reject me for being pregnant, see? So they would have a secret abortion, see, to avoid that. So that was certainly a motive. And, in terms of guilt, if you had a fear that great, that would certainly be a partial excuse. in a way, even though it's still wrong to do. See? But the feeling is the way our culture is, the idea of having a baby when you're 15 years old in our culture would seem preposterous. I can't handle it. I can't deal with such a thing. So in these wonderful homes for pregnant women, they give them the alternative to put the baby up for adoption, and no one in their family has to even know about it, that kind of thing. So those are just some of the types of things I think that young women would feel.
And when you
So I just want to say before I have to leave because we started later than we thought. I just want to recommend the book. The book is mostly written by David Dowd, and these accounts, after you read all these accounts of their attempts to try to help these women, it just will certainly encourage many people to themselves become sidewalk advocates, but also to give the book to people who have never even considered this whole matter.
Thank you.
Get the book.
sad songs, right? Rhonda,
Thank you.
Rhonda, if you could share, what are some of the resources that you would recommend that whether you're becoming a sidewalk counselor after listening to this, or someone in your life who's planning on getting an abortion, or whether you are someone who's
I would say just Google in your own area. Just if you're watching this, just Google pregnancy centers, things like that, and you'll find the ones that take care of the mothers.
How do you make sure?
David, you'll probably have an even better answer to that.
I would echo the point. I would echo the idea that. Thank you, Rhonda. God bless you. I would echo CareNet is a national organization, but in many of our towns we do have crisis pregnancy centers. My friend in New York operated a good group called Expectant Mother Care. Now, Expectant Mother Care has become Compass Care, and Compass Care encapsulates New York, Rochester, and Syracuse and Buffalo. So anybody who's in New York State can look up Encompass Mother Care, if I remember the name correctly. But the point is that, as Rhonda said, the people who work in these facilities are some of the most endearing people you would ever want to meet. Just, Sean, I can just extend this point one more moment. We were invited to do a tour of the CareNet facility here in Vero Beach a few days ago. And myself and a friend named Gene O'Neill, who is a former board member who invited me to do this tour, and a couple of men who are active in their particular parishes. So we had 3 different parishes represented, sat in the room with the counselor, and then were given a tour by the director to understand the kind of experience they have in the more than 100 women who have come in the past few months who have decided to save their babies. So we saw the place, the room. We were in the room where the ultrasound was administered, and we literally saw the ultrasound of a 10-week-old baby in the womb of a mom who had been there a couple of days previously, who decided to keep her baby. And I think any of us who are moved, if we read this book, I would encourage any of us in our parishes to contact our local crisis pregnancy center and see if we can arrange for such an interview.
That's great. I really like the idea of going through the parish or a church for those resources because, think about the name Planned Parenthood sounds so like good and holy, but you reach out to the wrong group, you might end up at one of these businesses. And I want to talk to you about the business side of it.
Right.
Because it's really important for the people falling prey to the business approach. They need to understand how they're being marketed to. But before we get into that, David, I want to circle back to a point we didn't get to explore too much. So there's a lot of justification I guess Rhonda was kind of touching on this point a little bit. There's a lot of justification for, well, when is abortion okay, right? So like if the mom's health is at risk, if they were raped, or if it's an early trimester, what would you say to those beliefs? How would you refute that those things, that abortion isn't okay?
Rhonda provides a very important perception on this and perspective on this, because having been involved in this work for so many years, she can help us understand the way understanding has evolved in time. I'm going to make an attempt to perhaps speak from my experience here. But, back in the 90s, right, we learned about the principle of double effect. The principle of double effect was taught by Human Life International at Love, Life, and Family conferences. And what we became aware of as a result of Monsignor William Smith teaching us on the formation of a moral conscience is, a mom can be under attack and a baby can be in her womb, in the fallopian tube, for example, and the baby could be growing and threatening the life of the mother. And so under the principle of double effect, the church could see that abortion would be allowable to save the life of the mother. Now, of course, in our history, we have some beautiful examples of moms who said no, they would sacrifice their life. But in the 90s, this was something that if the baby was attacking the mother, the baby was considered to be, challenging the fifth commandment, thou shalt not kill. And so this was something they became, an allowance was made. So here we are in 2024, and I mentioned CareNet. Well, our local CareNet just shared a video with us, a 45-minute a video by a Dr. William Lyle from Pensacola, and he is a surgeon. He works in a hospital in Pensacola, and he showed us, Sean, 5 different operations that are taking place on the preborn infant in the womb of the mother. He showed us he took us to medical school so he could describe this, but then he could show us the actual video of an operation taking place, and then the textbook presentation as an illustration of what just took place. 2 babies are in the womb at the same time. They're twins. They were conceived from the same sperm and the same egg. And the 2 babies actually were growing side by side, but one baby was ingesting more nutrients from the mother than the second baby. And so what the doctors are able to do is to go into the womb, and I'm not a technical person, I'm not a medical person, but we watched as the instruments were used to create a barrier between the 2 babies so that each baby would receive equal nourishment. And now this second baby, who was tiny, was growing at a rate where the baby would be delivered healthy. We also saw an operation on the heart of a baby in the womb. And we saw an operation on, if I can remember, on an organ in the baby, kidney, if I remember correctly. My point is that we even saw an operation on the brain of a baby. My point is that medicine has evolved in the most remarkable ways. Do we hear about these advances from the culture of death? Do we hear about these advances from the Democrats when they're trying to get you to vote for Joe Biden? Do we hear about these advances when Joe Biden says he's going to focus on abortion between now and the election? Of course we don't. But we do hear about them within the culture of life. And we need to recognize that the life of the mom, the doctor made this point. What is the purpose of medicine? Thou shalt do no harm. When a medical doctor proceeds with a medical procedure, the person upon whom the procedure is directed is his patient. His patient is a baby now inside the womb, as as early as 10 weeks from gestation. The doctor made the point. Dr. Lyle made the point. A person is a person, no matter how small. And this person deserves personhood protection. This, in my mind, is one of the most exciting developments in our post-Roe Dobbs versus Virginia stage of evolution in our efforts to build a culture of life. Yes, this is going to create great division. So did the Civil War. But, Christ suffered, died, and was buried. And in our suffering, I'm not as good at Rhonda is explaining the spiritual side of this, perhaps. But, our suffering can have purpose to bring us to our senses. And I'm going to go another step, but you may have more questions. So I'm just going to mention this real quick point we can circle back to. Think of the language that our youngsters who are in our public schools, even in our Catholic schools, all right? Father Paul Marks, back in 1991 in Santa Clara, California, staged a discussion between Father Mark Caligari, a Jesuit teacher at Brophy Prep School, Father Casimir Peterson, a canon lawyer from the Diocese of Baltimore, Randy Engel, who wrote Sex Education, The Final Plague, and Colin Kelley Math, who wrote Sex Respect, which was a textbook being used as in sex education classes at the time. And Randy Engel raised the point and made the point. The difference between Sex Respect and Sex Education, The Final Plague, and the sex education courses that are being taught by Planned Parenthood people in our public schools is only God language.
Wow. That's really interesting. Especially, I didn't share this with you earlier, David. In the military, I was part of the what they call the psychological operations community, and our mission was to create information that we would disseminate to influence a target audience. Whether it was getting enemies to surrender or whatever, but trying to change the behaviors to help us accomplish, our country's objectives in war. And so this type of when you were brought up the vocabulary and how it affects the perception of others.
Right.
So what I'm hearing you say is basically that they're taking the God out of the message. And and it breaks my heart. Since you kind of brought up the political side of this whole thing, I want to explore it a little bit further, because I actually had a really good Republican client and friend of mine not long ago, just within the last few weeks. He told me, he goes, Sean, he goes, the issue that I think is preventing conservatives from getting elected, he said, is abortion. He goes, because conservatives take such a hard line on it, we don't, it takes a lot of the middle of the road voters who are okay with it under those circumstances, right? And it causes them to vote for the left. So anyways, man, how do you wrestle with this? How do you wrestle with a society? I like how you separate it out. You and Rhonda are calling it the culture of life and the culture of death. So my question for you is how do you take a society that is that divided and try to win more over to where the culture of life is growing?
Well, your question is a good question. And I'm going to go back to my reference to my friend Grace on the sidewalks. She said to me when she knew we were going to write this book, tell the story from our side and let them know the care that we have for the mother and the child. See, this is the point that has been when we talk about a spiritual battle, we've got to talk about Satan. And Satan comes to kill, steal, and destroy. The language of propaganda is a language of deception. And what we have found in our culture, we have incredible people like Dr. Carrie Gress, who has a PhD, and she will go back to Simon de Beauvoir and John Paul Sartre and help us understand the way the culture of death has co-opted the language of our culture. And this is part of the reason why I went to several sources, and I'm going to mention them right here. I don't know if you recall, but there's I think his name was Benjamin Hill, or Benjamin. I do take note. I do have notes, though, because my memory isn't the greatest. Let me see if I can find it.
One of my favorite things is that the weakest pencil is better than the strongest mind. I write everything down as well, my friend.
Beautiful. Benjamin Hall was a Fox News reporter, and he was he was nearly killed as a frontline reporter in Afghanistan. And he wrote a book called Saved. And as I happened to read Saved in the middle of writing this book, I became aware of he was giving us the language of war, the language of, the people trying to kill the Americans, and the people the Americans were trying to kill. And then I had the privilege of making a Rachel's Vineyard weekend many years ago. Teresa Burt founded Rachel's Vineyard Weekend. She's written a book called Forbidden Grief, in which she actually describes and has quotes from more than 100 women who made the Rachel's Vineyard Weekend. I happen to have had a younger brother who was the father of two dead babies. And when he learned I was going to make this weekend as a writer back in the early 90s, middle 90s, when I was working in Boston, he confessed his own story to me. And I can tell you that my brother Dan's grief was something that was profound. He eventually did take his own life. His grief was over the fact, I guess, each of his brothers had children, and he was the father of two dead babies. But in each case, and I knew I'd met both of the women involved, didn't know about the abortions until Dan told me. But in each case, he only did what the man was supposed to do. Take care of the woman, pay for the abortion. So we're at a stage where more and more people are waking up. We had in the CareNet and the Life Chain event we had here in Vero Beach on Sunday, a group of between 10 and 15 confirmation students who are Hispanic from our local parish, St. Helens parish. I talked to their confirmation teacher. They were holding street signs supporting life. And I was holding pictures of the baby inside the womb, 50 pictures that show from the moment of conception until the baby is born, the stages of development. They were fascinated. They were, moms and dads. And I mentioned to one young man, Father Donald Calloway has written a beautiful book called Consecration to St. Joseph. And, he helps us understand our responsibilities as a provider and protector for our children. My brother Dan used to counsel my nieces, to find a man who would be a good provider and protector. One of these youngsters, teenagers, Hispanic teenagers, pointed her finger at this young man and said, "Yeah, you got to be a man." My brother Jim said to me once, "Trust the wisdom of youth." And Sean, we need to provide our young people. We need to support our priests. We need to support our CCD teachers. We need to support people like Catherine Booth, who is organizing many of the Protestant churches here in Vero Beach to teach the language of life.
Amen, brother. It's David. I want to be totally open and share something really deep with you and our listeners right now. You talked about the father's responsibility in this, and how I don't know if I'd swept this under the rug in my own mind, but it's something that I guess you could say I've chosen to forget about. And I'm going to go back, rewind to, I'd just gotten out of the military. I was just out of combat. I was 21 years old, and, here I am struggling to make ends meet, was behind on my mortgage. I'd put all my money I saved up on this down payment as this house. It was during the subprime mortgage crisis. So I was on an ARM loan. My mortgage doubled. I was working part-time at Best Buy, making $10 an hour while trying to, finish school. And, literally Monica, who's now my wife of 19 years, her her engagement ring was out for repo. Like literally, I was 3 months behind on her engagement ring. And then I'm walking into a job interview. I was applying at Enterprise Rent-A-Car. I was walking into the job interview, and I get a call from Monica, and she's crying her eyes out. She's freaking out. She's in tears, and she's like, "I'm pregnant. Like, what are we going to do?" And she was so stressed out. And I remember going to that interview, and my face was ghost white, and I'm sure of it. And I was just sitting, and I didn't hear a word the guy interviewing me said. Needless to say, I didn't get the job.
Imagine. Wow.
And I get out of the interview, and I go, and all these feelings of like fear and scarcity, doubt, right?
This is powerful, Sean. This is so powerful.
Well, so Satan's filling my head with fears and doubts, and at the time I was not, my faith. I didn't have faith, and I wasn't. I wouldn't say I was a non-believer, but I was definitely borderline atheist, agnostic at the time in my life. And one of the first things, and now keep in mind, my wife is a cradle Catholic. But she's, so I go home and she's pouring, crying tears and telling me, what are we going to do? And her whole life, Rhonda mentioned this earlier, but my wife's whole life, her mom I got pregnant with you, and my wife and her brother are twins, non-identical twins. What is that? Fraternal,
right.
So they're non-identical, they're fraternal twins. And anyway, so her whole life, her mother had constantly been, hey, I got pregnant at an early age with twins, and it messed up my whole life, and my life was over. But what was it, right? But now keep in mind, she has a house, her kids are all alive and healthy, and they finished school and all this. But my wife was raised to believe, don't get pregnant. It's the worst thing ever. But that being said, this is where I need to beg forgiveness, seriously, because I looked my wife dead in the eye. I was like, well, we have a choice here. If you're that worried about it, and I'm just thinking to myself, this is probably better for us if we get an abortion at the time. And I
you were conditioned by being at war. You were probably conditioned by seeing people die, and by what's the word when we become immune to the reality of we're dealing with.
Yeah, like death almost becomes okay. It's normal.
Yeah.
Listen, at the end of the day, I share this with our listeners and you because, my wife looked me dead in the eye and she said, absolutely not. That's not an option. Don't ever bring that up to me again. And like you literally, when you were talking about that, like when you brought that up and all of a sudden, like tears welled up in my eyes because I've got now my son, who I made that suggestion about, is 18 years old. He's going to school. He's learning computer coding. He is a avid YouTuber. He's got a massive following on YouTube. Not that matters, right? But point is,
but those are important to him, and they're the human. Desensitized is the word that I was trying to think of earlier.
But my son, desensitized to death, right? Yeah, that's fair. Right. I would agree with that. But all that's an excuse because. But I also, anyway, I've got this beautiful, healthy, happy son, and he doesn't smoke. He's going to school. He loves life. He's a phenomenal brother to his little sisters. He's got two little sisters.
Wow.
And I share that story with you because just the fact that what I thinking about the fact that I suggested that to her, like, makes me just, wow, I need to repent and I need to beg forgiveness. And that was just me suggesting it. And I can only imagine how your brother felt. And on top of that, I can only imagine how women who go through it feel long term, because
this is why Rachel's Vineyard, Project Rachel, this is why each of the Sidewalk Advocates, Sidewalk Counselors has pamphlets which will refer people directly to Rachel's Vineyard. Rachel's Vineyard has an 800 number. We even have an 800 number for stopabortion.com, so that a mother who's taken the first I get them mixed up, misoprostol and misoprostol. The first abortion pill is given to the woman at the abortion clinic. We need to include this. There are several references in sad songs which describes the process that a woman follows when she goes in for the abortion pill. The abortion doctor arrives, and within minutes, Sean, women are walking out with a paper bag. In the paper bag are her instructions to take misoprostol. Rhonda mentioned Abby Johnson. Abby Johnson sponsored the movie Unplanned, in which you can see a woman by herself in her bathroom, lying on the floor, having a spontaneous abortion.
From the medicine, from the pills?
From the effect of the first pill, mifepristone, cuts off the nutrients to the baby. And so within 3 or 4 days, the baby is dying. And then the mother is instructed to take the misoprostol in the privacy of her own home. And the misoprostol is used to cause contractions and expel the baby. And the woman is by herself when this happens. The testimony of women who sit on a john, expel the baby from their womb, from their uterus, and then get up and look at their dead baby is, talk about post-traumatic stress syndrome.
How do you get over
We
that?
are unleashing something that the Biden administration has said they must make public. We are unleashing something that CVS and some of the major drug chains are selling over the counter. The doctors are prescribing. This is an assault on maternity. You speak about the devil. The evil in this assault is the assault the culture of death has devolved to in our own country. Now, how does this change? You asked, how does this change? How do we bring about change? Quite frankly, we need a spiritual awakening in this country, and we're seeing a spiritual awakening happen. Anybody who saw the March for Life a couple of days ago witnessed, and I've been to 19 of them, have witnessed the extraordinary experience of young people. We know major media underestimates the size of the people who march, but we also know that Donald Trump addressed us in person, the only U.S. president who's ever addressed us in person. We also know, as a result of the groundswell of support for life in places like Florida, we are electing pro-life representatives and senators. These are people who need our support. But more important, our priests, our ministers, our rabbis. Rabbi Yehuda Levin is in New York City, and he is one of the most effective supporters of life in the Jewish community. I'm giving you these examples. I can tell you one more story if you let me.
Please, go right ahead.
When I was with Human Life International, if I don't remember the year, but the early 90s, the United Nations was having a conference in Beijing. And actually, we were told this story by the Bishop of Guatemala, who was from South Boston at Holy Trinity Church. He had come to the parish to say Mass, and then we met in the Cardinal Madero Center in the basement for our coffee and donuts. And a group of us were standing with him, and he told us the story. The United States sent a contingent of people to the women's conference in Beijing, led by a man under the Clinton administration by the name of Timothy Worth. And they were voting to authorize the United Nations to include the provision of contraception as part of the deal when the United Nations provided financial support for developing countries. They were taking a vote. And the Bishop of Guatemala said to us that a few months before this conference, he had a call from one of his friends in the Catholic Church. And this friend alerted him to the fact that this Beijing conference was taking place. And this friend said, "You've got to get a group of Guatemalans to stand up for life." So he described the Guatemalan community. There's very poor people, and some of them live in little villages along rivers. Well, the bishop said to the person who called him, "I will get you your group of pro-life people." He hung up the phone. He didn't know what he was going to do. He called to a few people he knew. All of a sudden, the Guatemalan people are going out in boats and recruiting people. And they sent a contingent of people to the Beijing conference. And the vote is starting. And this Guatemalan group of just humble people, speaking of humble people, right, stood together. And they stood together defending life. And little by little, other countries were joining them to stand up against the United States and Timothy Worth. They were going to be defeated, and then the Muslim countries came in to join them. And the Clinton administration's effort at that time was defeated. Now we know that the United Nations, with the help of Bill Gates and people of Bill Gates's place in society, right, are using. In fact, Bill Gates's wife left him because he was supporting the use of contraception in these developing countries. We're in a culture war. And the sooner we acknowledge the fact that we are in a culture war, the sooner we turn to Evangelium Vitae by our Holy Father, the sooner we turn to, and this is difficult under Pope Francis, but the sooner we recognize the unitive relationship between lovemaking and procreation is reserved for marriage, which is something Father Paul Marx taught, that Pope Leo XIII taught in Rerum Novarum. The sooner young people are going to know people care. They need to know people care. And we need to let them know that people care. And your beautiful example as a humble advocate for life, advocate for the faith of people is the best starting place.
Amen, man. It's like, I think that it all goes back to, including the language of God in everything we do in our schools, in our businesses, and my company is a faith-based organization, and my people absolutely love it. And I think you're right. It's like, if you look at all the reasons why, okay, so why do these businesses exist, right?
Right.
They know they're killing. They know they're in the. I love how they're on the. You clarified that this is in the business of the culture of death. It's like, okay, so they're doing it. Okay, if it's a business and they're killing for money, then I would say that's certainly tied to greed, which is one of the deadly sins. And then let's tie and then if you think about it like this, where do people decide to pull the trigger on getting an abortion? It's coming from scarcity and fear. But if you're a lover of Christ, then everything you do is coming from faith, and that the Lord will provide. And so it's almost like I see how you've really separated out the culture of life versus the culture of death, because
we can even go a little deeper, because I want to bring up this point, and I think this is important to raise. Staying with your observation regarding something called what we call beneath the surface, right? A friend of mine named Paul Morano hosted a program called Beneath the Surface. So he looked at the events taking place in the world. We studied diplomatic American history at the University of Redlands. So we knew that behind the scenes, before there's a public declaration of support between England and France and the United States, there'd be a diplomatic agreement between the people. So what I'm saying is, when we look at the deadly sins and we look at pride, right? The root of all deadly sin is pride. And so the countermanding virtue, as we learn in our church, is humility. We have to take ourselves and our ideas down a few notches and trust in God and trust in His guidance.
Amen. And all these decisions about, euthanizing, I guess sterilization of culture, less babies, conception, abortion, that is the exact opposite.
Right. That's the agenda of kill, steal, and destroy. We talk about transgenderism. Planned Parenthood is now providing hormone treatments for homosexual and transgender youth. And, there is no penalty that there's no accountability. We have a song lyric about self-control, and I think we need to equip our mothers to be mothers, fathers to be fathers, and trust in Jesus. I have to tell you, the battery on my cell is beginning to show me I have 10% of juice left, so I have to watch my time here.
We're going to wrap up here. In fact, I think some key takeaways from our entire convo with you, David, and with Ronda Chervin.
Chervin. Right.
Ronda Chervin.
RondaChervin.com is where people can find Rhonda's incredible books that she's written.
I cannot wait to read Taming the Lion Within about how to control your anger. That is a really cool topic that
She's
I feel
helped
like
me dramatically with this, right?
I feel like I'll be able to use that in a lot of coaching conversations with managers or executives that I work with that are very angry and frustrated. I'm excited to read her book. But
Good.
I think that biggest takeaway. So number one is I'm going to hit a Bible verse that comes to mind is Matthew 7 verse 5, where basically first cast out thy beam out of thy own eye, and then shalt thou see clearly to cast out the mote of thy brother's eye. So for those of you who have gone through, either had an abortion or know someone who has, or have suggested it, like myself in a moment of weakness and fear, just know that you can use that to help other people going through the same situation make the right decision and choose life. I think that's a huge takeaway from our time together.
Good.
Another, I think, is like the fact that all of these evil decisions are coming from evil, and
Right.
It's really important. If you're making decisions tied to fear and scarcity or anger or wrath or pride, that likely the decision is not going to be good, and you've got to focus on faith and God. Believe that you're going to be able to eat, and God's there for you. What are your biggest takeaways from our time together that you want our audience to really take away from listening to our show today?
Something that I feel is made a difference in my own life. I had an occasion to be angry at somebody who had thrust a camera in my face in March of 2023. And Jim Thomas said to me, Dave, go to the Eucharistic Chapel and spend a few weeks in prayer. They're going to be targeting you anyway. So, it'd be better for you to be off the sidewalks and not a target for them. So I turned to spiritual reading, and I include several books from my spiritual reading as references in Sad Songs: Cultivating Virtue, What We Learned from the Saints, Daily Reflections by Padre Pio, John Paul II, Stations of the Cross, and several scriptural references. In summary, I would like to just recognize that vocabulary and spiritual gems from our observations, from our daily practice, we need to cultivate within the reader the ingredients in prayer to turn to for the strength in sustaining the fight for life. You made the point. If I point a finger at somebody else, I got 3 fingers pointing at me. This is where the work has to start, inside me. But Dr. Patrick Castle asked a very important question. Imagine if we could see the crosses of those who walk into the abortion clinic, the abortion facility. Imagine if we could see them in their crosses and recognize some of these are our own crosses. Who do we turn to? The one who carried the cross for us. And I will even take us right to the Mass.
Very powerful.
Right to the moment of consecration, right to when our priest in the Catholic Church is raising the host and when he's raising the blood of Jesus. We have prayers, my Lord and my God. And we have a prayer when the wine is raised. Thank you, Jesus, for being mindful of me, a sinner, and redeeming me by your sacred blood. Remaining humble. This is his work.
Beautiful, David. Thank you so much. Humble Faith listeners, it's been an honor to bring you our amazing guests, Ronda Chervin and David Dowd today. Pick up a copy in the script, the manuscript of our today's show. You're going to be able to, there'll be a link for you to pick up David's new book, Sad Songs. If this is a topic you want to read more about and explore further and learn more about the culture of life versus the culture of death and how it's impacting our society, Sad Songs is definitely a book for you. I can't wait to get my hands on that book, your book as well, David. So thank you for writing it, and thank you for you are an inspiration. The courage that you and Rhonda have to go out there and do in spite of the judgment and the fear of these companies that are out there doing what they do.
There are so many people that we have to give credit for. I'm indebted to the late Chris Slattery, Father William Kiefer, Father Paul Marks. I'm indebted to Sean Brogan, Bill Cotter, Jim Toma, and countless other friends who are on the sidewalks. Sean, these are people who are sacrificing their lives to save the soul of the baby and the mother, and the father, and the abortion clinic workers.
Well, God bless those that have inspired you and come before, and God bless you for everything you've brought to the table. And thank you for joining us today in Humble Faith, David. Have an amazing rest of your week, my friend. God bless you.
God bless you, and peace be with you. Thank you, Sean.
Hello, God's beloved. I'm Annabelle Mosley, author, professor of theology, and host of Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. I invite you to listen in and find inspiration along this sacred journey we're traveling together to make our lives a masterpiece and, with God's grace, become saints. Join me, Annabelle Mosley, for Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. God bless you. Remember, you're never alone. God is always with you.
Thank you for listening to a production of WCAT Radio. Please join us in our mission of evangelization. And don't forget, love lifts up when knowledge takes flight.